The major scale, also known as the Ionian mode, has 7 notes. If we label each note with a number, you get the scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. It doesn't matter what the tonic note of our major scale is, it always has the scale degrees 1 to 7. For example, C major has the notes C, D, E, F, G, A and B, with the 7 scale degrees we mentioned. The major scale is useful as a point of reference for all other scales or modes. The focus of this video is the Locrian mode. It is also known as the 7th mode of the major scale. It has the scale degrees 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6 and flat 7. C Locrian therefore has the notes C, D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat and B flat. You'll see that there are only 2 notes in common with the major scale. This shows us that we are a long way away from the major sound. It can be useful to compare Locrian with the Phrygian mode. The Phrygian mode has the scale degrees 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6 and flat 7. So the only note of difference between Locrian and Phrygian is the flat 5 note. This note is extremely important in defining the Locrian sound. If you've seen all of our other modes explained videos, you will know that the rest of the modes have a perfect 5th interval in them. This interval is the foundation of major and minor chords and gives the other modes a sense of resolution and completeness. In Locrian we have a diminished 5th interval. This gives the Locrian mode its diminished sound. It is unstable, dark and tense and feels like it wants to resolve. For this reason and more which we will discuss later, Locrian is rarely used in songwriting. You may come across it in parts of songs to create tension, but this is often resolved to another mode. If you need more help with modes, then check out our video in the description below. You can use the notes from a scale or mode to create a series of chords. These chords are what make up a key in songwriting. The most basic chords are constructed with 3 notes and are called triads. They will be either major, minor, diminished or augmented. Let's use the C Locrian mode we saw earlier to construct our chords. To create our first chord, we take the first note, which is C, and then skip a note, which takes us to E flat, and then skip a note from E flat, which gets us to G flat. These 3 notes will create a triad. In this case, C, E flat and G flat create C diminished. This is our 1 chord. Then we move on to the next note and start again. In C Locrian, the next note is D flat. If we skip a note from D flat, we have F. Skip a note from F and we get to A flat. D flat, F and A flat create a D flat major chord. This becomes our 2 chord. We then repeat the process for all the remaining notes of the Locrian mode to generate a set of 7 chords. Note how we have repeated the notes twice here to make constructing the chords easier to visualize. This gives us the following chords. 1 is C diminished, 2 is D flat major, 3 is E flat minor, 4 is F minor, 5 is G flat major, 6 is A flat major, and 7 is B flat minor. Let's now look at some common chord progressions using this pool of chords. Although we're in the key of C Locrian, remember that the Roman numeral system means you can use these progressions in any key you like. Just work out your pool of 7 chords and use the progressions in the same Roman numeral order. As we discussed earlier, the defining note in Locrian is the flat 5. The diminished 5th interval therefore sits in our 1 chord, which is C diminished in C Locrian. We usually avoid the diminished chord in popular chord progressions, but in Locrian it is the 1 chord, the defining chord in a key, so we have to tackle the diminished chord head on. If we look at the chords that have the flat 5 note in them, then we have 1, 3 and 5. So let's use these chords together for our first Locrian progression. You can hear straight away how tense the Locrian mode is. The flat 5 note is constantly demanding a resolution, but we never get there, so the progression feels unsettled. I hope you can now appreciate why diminished chords and the Locrian mode are not widely used in popular songwriting. But just because something isn't widely used doesn't mean that you shouldn't use it. By experimenting with the Locrian mode, you might find a sound that works well with your song. Indeed, many songwriters have used Locrian for part of their songs to generate tension, and then resolve to another mode, for example Phrygian, for the rest of the song. So it is always worth experimenting with modes, even if you think you don't like the sound, as you may find a way to incorporate them into your song. Before we move on to the next chord progression, I'd like to thank you for choosing to watch this video. We rely on your kind support to keep the channel running. If you're able to help us, we now have channel memberships and super thanks available. These allow us to keep on making songwriting content that is available to everyone. Click on thanks and join below this video to find out more. Let's now look at another big issue people find with the Locrian mode. As you may know, the modes are derived from what we call the major scale. This means that every mode shares its notes with a major scale. For example, C Locrian shares its notes with the D flat major scale. Because of this, they also share the same set of chords, which we created earlier. They are just in a different order. We discussed the problems with the 1 chord in Locrian being a diminished chord. In its relative major scale, the diminished chord is the 7 chord. In a major key, the 7 diminished chord wants to strongly resolve to the major 1 chord. As we can see here, the 7 to 1 change in D flat major is the same as the 1 to 2 change in C Locrian. If we play the 1 to 2 change, the strength of the resolution will make the listener feel like they are in a major key. You can appreciate how much of a problem this could be. It is another reason why Locrian songs are so rare. Here are a couple of progressions that have this 1 to 2 change in them. Whilst being in C Locrian, listen to how they sound. Do they really feel like they are in Locrian? So far we have only used basic triads in our Locrian progressions, but you are of course free to use different chord types in your Locrian songs. We will only look at a couple of examples, so this won't be exhaustive. Feel free to experiment with different chord types. As we know now, the biggest problem with Locrian is the tense diminished feel that wants to resolve. In order to smooth this out a little, we can use minor and major 7th chords. Let's take an earlier progression and swap in the minor and major 7th chords. See how this changes the sound. Here's another Locrian progression that uses all minor chords with the diminished chord. It also has a descending number order after the 1 chord. Listen to how the minor 7 chords change the feel here. Watch the video on screen now to better understand all 7 of the major scale modes.